Welcome to today's edition of Upper Bowl Perspective, a Utah Jazz podcast proving the fans sitting in the nosebleeds know just as much as those sitting courtside. I'm Caleb Walker. I'm here with my co-host Kyler Sparrow.
Power to the people.
And J.R. Hunsaker.
Happy to be here.
We're excited to be with you today. An exciting night last night as the NBA awards ceremony took place. I think probably a month later than it needed to, but we'll let Adam Silver deal with that. Hopefully this off season and during next season, so that we can have a regular season award ceremony, like semi close to the regular season. But alas, it went. I'm gonna say exactly how I expected. Luka was the Rookie of the Year. Rudy Gobert was the Defensive Player of the Year. Giannis Antetokounmpo got the MVP over James Harden, that beloved thing. Mike Budenholzer, Coach of the Year. And Kyler, was there anything unexpected at that award ceremony? Anything that you didn't expect?
Well,
with the awards,
I think an award that I didn't really track very much was that Teammate Award, or the Sportsmanship Award. And so, as we were watching it yesterday, when Mike Conley won the award, I just didn't know who the candidates were, so I was super stoked that we got to see an extra jazz man on stage, getting an award, because Rudy was kind of expected, but having Mike Conley go up there and have his little spiel and mention Utah in his acceptance speech, that was something that was unexpected, but very, very beloved by me, and I'm sure a lot of these other Jazz fans as well.
Mm-hmm. JR, anything from you?
When it came to the actual award ceremony, no. I mean, the favorite one for literally every single category, so it was a little underwhelming in that regard. I was surprised to see Quinn smile when Mike Conley got the Sportsmanship Award. I mean, I think that's maybe the first time I've ever really seen him smile and smile that genuinely, so if you can get Quinn Snyder to smile at you before you even put on a uniform for the team he coaches, then that means that you are a very, very good player. So that was my favorite part of the award ceremony, was just seeing Quinn smile. I didn't know he was capable of doing that.
I know that Shaq impression was pretty
I know, fake Shaq. If you haven't watched it, go. First you need to listen to how Shaq actually talks, so listen to him do MC a little bit beforehand, but then listen to fake Shaq. It was quite enjoyable.
It was pretty fun.
And like JR said, I think the favorites won in every instance for the awards. The closest probably were Rookie of the Year and MVP, just because Trae Young had that push towards the end of the season. But I think fairly Luka won because he was consistently great throughout the duration of the season. And Trae Young came on in the second half of the season. It was just on fire, but it is a whole season thing. And I think that's part of the reason that James Harden didn't win the MVP as well, was just the Rockets had a really rough start, and so did he. And when Chris Paul went down and Clint Capella and he had to shoulder the load, that's the part of the season that we remember. But Giannis was, again, consistently great throughout the duration of the season.
Yeah,
but
his team was too. And going back to that consistency thing, going back to last year, for those that are still a little salty for last year's Rookie of the Year, the same case was made for Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons was really good ever since the beginning, where Donovan didn't necessarily have a slow start, he just didn't have as big of a role in the beginning. So his success was only for most of the year instead of all of it. So it is important to remember that it is an entire regular season award when considering who should win and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And I have to give a shout out to the Sparrow family. Megan Sparrow, here's your shout out. We had the opportunity of watching part of the NBA awards ceremony in Vivint Smart Home Arena from the court, because we were at a shoot around for Megan, Kyler's sister, for those of you who don't know, took us to a shoot around for season ticket holders. So that was quite the experience. Dream come true, honestly.
We never thought that we'd get sponsors after 4 episodes, but apparently we have fans, so that was huge.
My family is already sponsoring us and getting us some good good picks and some good experiences out there at Vivint. Getting some lower bowl time, or typically up in that upper bowl perspective. So.
It was nice to know what it felt like to actually be that close to the court where you can actually like see the details. Probably the last time I'll ever be that close in my life, but it was definitely worth it.
Yeah. Great experience though. But now let's get on to the meat of the podcast after we had those shout out. Well, first, do shout out to Rudy Gobert.
Yes.
Back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year. Something only Mark Eaton has done that as a Jazz man. I think he's only the 10th player in NBA history to ever have multiple Defensive Player of the Years. Or maybe it's 10th back-to-back. One of the two. Anyway, there's not a lot. He's joined elite company. And I'm excited to see what he does next year to change his game, because part of the reason he won this year, I think, was because he improved dramatically outside when people drew him out of the paint. And he was able to kind of go with a new flow of the defense a little bit that was tweaked, showing his malleability and just the skill that he has. Now we'll get into the meat of the podcast. This is our free agency primer podcast. 5 days to free agency, because now it starts June 30th in the evening, which is wonderful, because now instead of having to stay up till midnight to see all the madness that goes down, we can just stay up till 6 or 7 or whatever.
I usually stay up till 6.
But I guess we'll start questioning again for Kyler Sparrow. Tobias Harris is probably the most, not expected, but he's the one that's been talked about the most in terms of free agency. Sure. Most coveted, that's the word I'm looking for. In terms of free agents that are on the Jazz's radar, from what I hear, you've been doing a little bit of looking into that, but what do you think about the whole Tobias Harris situation and the prospect of him coming to the Jazz?
What do I think of the prospect of Tobias Harris on the Jazz? This is something that has been a complete dream for me, something that I've been talking to whoever will listen to me about this for a really, really long time. He is such a rare commodity as far as forwards go in the NBA, as someone who can play the pick and roll both as the roller, the popper, and the ball handler. There is probably only 2 or 3 guys, Kevin Durant and Blake Griffin, that can say that they can do the same. He's a guy who's below average defensively. He's somebody that a lot of teams will be able to target, but with such strong defenders around him, and he's never had as good of a rim protector. I mean, Joel Embiid's really good rim protector in Philadelphia, but in that Jazz system, he's not going to do too terrible for us, but offensively, he opens up so much. Like, just imagine the defense having to key on him, which will give Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell even more looks. The unfortunate thing is that it's a little bit of a complication in the process to get him, but I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute.
J. Bobby, what do you think about him?
I think, other than Kevin Durant, he is the most versatile forward in the entire league.
Ooh.
Offensively. Not defensively.
Forward. I think small forwards.
Sorry, I will say power forward. I will amend my statement to power forward.
I was going to say that.
But he is a pretty incredible offensive player, and on top of that, he also grabs 8 rebounds a game, which is really nice. Tobias Harris, he becomes a starter for the Jazz. He comes to the Jazz. He instantly makes us what I see as a top 5 offensive team in the entire league. Last year, to close out the season from, I want to say it was January 1st to the end of the year, I think we were the 6th rated offense overall, just in that small stretch, which is really, really good. We had a really rough start to our offensive season. But to take a team that's already good offensively, especially when we have a stretch 4 type of player, which Tobias absolutely is, I think he just makes us so incredible offensively that we become even more of a title contender than we are even talked about right now. As Kyler said, it's going to take an incredible amount of finagling for it to be possible for him to even come to the Jazz, because he is definitely worth a max contract. But if we see him as a Jazz man, I think the fans will absolutely fall in love with him because he's going to become an absolutely dynamic player for the Jazz.
I think it is widely accepted. Like, he's a fantastic player and would fit in seamlessly. But, like has been hinted at, and I'm sure people have seen who are listening to this, it's going to be really, really hard to pull off. Correct me if I'm wrong with my statements about this because it does get a little tricky in here. But from what I understand, in order to sign Tobias Harris, we're going to have to do it before the Mike Conley deal goes down and trade or sign him into space. So basically, the reason that would have to happen is because after the Mike Conley deal, we will not have space to sign him. And so in order for this to happen, we're going to have to sign him before July 6th, which is when the Mike Conley deal goes down, I believe.
Yes.
And then for the Mike Conley deal to then happen, because we're also trading for him into space that we had created, we need to have a third party come in, or a third team basically, and we need to waive favors, have that third party be interested in Dante. Definitely
Anybody's
not
interested in
Donovan. Blasphemy. Be interested in Dante enough to take him as part of that trade and somehow have that third team and the Grizzlies touch probably just like a cash deal or a protected second round pick, because all parties have to touch in a trade, or touch meaning like interact and have some assets traded. So for that to happen, there would have to be a team that would be willing to help us, which is basically the same situation that the Lakers are in right now, trying to create a max law, which no one wants to help another team become a super team by signing another like all-star. So very unlikely. I'm sure that Justin Zanuck and Dennis Lindsey are looking into it and doing as much as they can, but it's going to be pretty hard to figure out.
Yeah, this is what I've done a lot of research on, so I'm going to kind of try and share some possibilities of what I think the Jazz can do. So, if this would also require us to guarantee Kyle Korver's contract, which the Jazz, before the trade, if we guarantee Kyle Korver's contract, are going to have just over the max amount of cap space available by like $200,000. So obviously well planned out by the Jazz that they'll have just the right amount for a max opening. So the only way this works is if Tobias Harris, before July 6th, like Caleb says, comes to the Jazz and says, like, if you give me the max money, I'll take it. And so if that happens, there's two different scenarios that can happen. And both of them require, first, that we don't guarantee Derek Favors' contract. The second, and then we can go two places from there. It's something that I've researched a lot. I tried to do this on the Grizzlies side, and I know that as of the day of the trade, I can't remember if it was the Grizzlies owner or their GM, but one of them really, really likes Dante Exum as an asset, and they weren't able to get Dante Exum in the trade, but they really wanted him. So there's two ways. Like Caleb said, we need a third team involved, but that team could either take Dante Exum or Kyle Korver. And so if the Memphis Grizzlies were originally planning on waiving Kyle Korver and they don't want to keep his guaranteed contract, we could find a contender that would be willing to take, that has some cap room, that would just needs a really veteran shooter that would be willing to take Kyle Korver's. Some teams that might be interested, depending on if the Lakers don't get a max contract and they just need guys, the Lakers could be there. You have the Kings, you have the Pacers, you have the Nuggets, and if the Clippers only end up getting one star, you have the Clippers. Those are some teams that are looking to contend next year and might be interested in just getting a shooter, but also have the space to get him by, like Caleb said, just paying some cash or a second round pick. Or, as Caleb alluded to, you find a rebuilding team that wouldn't mind helping the Jazz. So we're talking about like a team, either Eastern teams or teams whose windows aren't for another 3 or 4 years, because the Jazz window is going to be right now, so they're helping the Jazz right now. And Dante Exum in 3 years, when their window hits, might really be interested. So teams like that, you have the Hawks as a possibility, you have the Bulls as a possibility, the Suns, and the Timberwolves. So really, you just need either a team that views Dante Exum as even like the slightest bit of an asset, or Kyle Korver seen as the slightest bit of an asset if Memphis is willing to take Dante Exum, which according to what I've heard from the Memphis Grizzlies side, the Grizzlies do like Dante. So it's a little complicated, yes, but I do think it is something that if Tobias comes to the Jazz would be able to pull off, given a couple of days to get it done.
And Tobias has dropped a lot of kind of words and just some ideas on what he wants in his role next season, because Tobias knows very well that he is a very, very coveted free agent, one of the top free agents in this entire year. And he's been reported saying is the two things he's prioritizing and where he chooses to go is his role on a team and the style of play of that team. And because of what he said, there's been a lot of people reporting that he has a lot of strong interest in the Jazz. I know Tony Jones of The Athletic has reported it, that he's been looking very seriously at the Jazz because Tobias Harris, his role on the Jazz, I think fits him really well with his play style. And he looks around him. Here's a guy who's in the prime of his career, Tobias Harris. He's in the front court with the Defensive Player of the Year. His backcourt is one of the best in the league with Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell. The worst player in your starting five is Joe Ingles. I mean, that's got to be incredibly attractive for a player of Tobias's caliber who knows how well the organization of the Utah Jazz is run. So I think if the Jazz can find enough of the pieces to make the trade even possible, I think there's a very, very good possibility that Tobias actually comes to Utah.
Yeah, and he stated several times that Brooklyn is, well, I mean, it's been reported several times, that Brooklyn is his priority. But Brooklyn, I think, has bigger aspirations than Tobias. So if they end up hitting with those aspirations, then I think there's a really good chance that Tobias is that second. I mean, the Jazz are the second or third best option for Tobias. So not something you want to hang your hat on, hedge all your bets, but I think it's a little bit more of a possibility than a lot of people are giving it credit for, just because of not only the things that Tobias are saying, but the thing that Justin Zanek's been saying, that we're going to be really aggressive. What the Jazz writers are saying, that the Jazz are not done making moves, they're not even close. Justin Zanek said that there's going to be a possibility there's going to be a lot of roster spots open. So there's just been a lot of verbiage that either we're overreacting to, which it's overreaction season. I mean, it's the same thing as the off season. Everything you just overreact until you get disappointed. But just there's a lot of verbiage that's been going on that makes me think the closer and closer we get to free agency, the less and less I think the Jazz are just gonna stay pat with where their roster is right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that could be part of the reason that, with Justin Zanuck saying that there is a possibility for a lot of roster spots, could be the reason that the Jazz were so aggressive in the second round, because it's affordable players that they can just plug in to the bench. And if you have a starting five, like it would be with Tobias there, like our next best people would be Royce and George Niang off the bench.
So George Niang is your seventh
man.
best.
But
that's a scary thought.
You fill out the roster with second rounders and kind of spread the minutes of the starters, and I think it works out okay. But like you said, still being aggressive. We'll see what actually happens when the dust clears on July 7th or so. We'll have a lot better idea of what's going to happen and how we're going to look after all of this. But I think we'll move on, because if you want to know more about the Tobias situation, like every single person who's a Jazz writer and ever has written several articles about it, so go look that up. But we'll move on, I think, Bobby, to Bobby Portis. What have you heard about the rumors with him, and what do you think of his situation as a free agent interested in the Jazz?
So this just kind of broke a couple of days ago that apparently Bobby Portis has a lot of interest in joining the Utah Jazz. As a player, I kind of see him as almost a budget version of Tobias Harris. He is a stretch four, His shooting numbers are actually almost identical to Tobias's. He shot 39% from 3 last year, which is great. And he averaged 14.2 points and 8.1 rebounds a game last season. So he's definitely a solid player, and he kind of fits the idea of the Jazz wanting to get a kind of a stretch 4 player. I think the biggest problem with him is that he is a restricted free agent, and he said a few months ago that he's expecting $16 million a year for his contract this year, which is basically the same amount that we're paying Derek Favors, so we couldn't have both. I think he's fun to talk about just because the idea of having somebody who can shoot the 3 ball from the power forward position is really attractive if we can't get Tobias, because that's not Derek Favors' playing style. And he's also large enough that he could play the backup 5 because he is 6'10", with, I believe he has like a 7'1" wingspan as well. But after you really start thinking about it, you think, A, is he actually worth as much as Derek Favors is to the organization? And in my opinion, I don't think he is if we have to pay him the $16 million a year that he wants. Because he's a restricted free agent, we're going to have to overpay him. I think he's worth more in the maybe 12 to 14 range is what I actually think he's worth. But because of the market and because of the fact that he is a restricted free agent, he's going to have to be overpaid, and I don't think it's worth it for the Jazz to seriously consider trade talks with him.
Yeah. That's kind of the same boat I'm in. Like, if you compare everything that Faves does and him accepting his role, not punching his teammates in the face, also, a nice thing. But I just think if you have to go side to side, yeah, Bobby Portis can shoot. But I think apart from stretch shooting, I feel like Faves is better in every aspect. Probably not ball handling either, but like, we don't need him to ball handle as our backup center. He's already got the pick and roll down with Joe Ingles, and the chemistry is already there, and he knows the system. I think just that I just don't love the idea, because it would basically be a swap. And I don't know if you're getting better by adding Bobby Portis.
Yeah, I think J. Bobby calling him discount Tobias Harris might be the best compliment he's ever received, because he is not even close to versatile. He is a guy that I think kind of like Favors is probably ideally a 5, but he can play the 4 because of his stretchability. He's not a guy that's gonna dribble or pass the ball at a high level. He's not as good of a defender. And so, unless, like J. Bobby says, you don't think Washington's gonna match $12 million, and you know that you can get Bobby and another really good role player to fill that Derek Favors money, he's not a guy that I'm looking for, like Caleb said, to swap with Derek Favors. Because, yes, the Jazz efficiency is increased so much when we just have a shooter at the 4, but also we hardly ever had a shooter at the 1, and we are adding that to the Jazz this season. So Howell Neto is our best shooting point guard, unless you count Donovan's point guard minutes. So I don't love the idea of the Jazz bringing in Bobby Portis. I'd much rather try to use the room exception or try to trade for a veteran stretch 4 that might be on the market.
And I think part of the biggest value that Favors brings isn't necessarily in the fact that he's the starting 4 for the Jazz. It's the fact that he's the backup 5. Mm-hmm. Derek Favors absolutely destroys second units when he plays the center. Derek Favors is good enough to be a starting center in the league, and he's playing backup to one of the top 2 or 3 centers in the league in Rudy Gobert. And I don't see Bobby Portis being able to be, maybe as good overall at the 4 position as Derek Favors, but he's definitely not going to be as good of a backup 5. So unless you can get him for a really good contract like Kyler says, I think we just need to waive him and then just trust the fact that Derek Favors, most of his value actually comes in the minutes that he's not playing with all the starters.
Yeah, but that's one of the reasons that as we get closer to free agency, I think the Jazz will be looking elsewhere, just because $17 million for your backup center, especially on a team that doesn't have a lot of depth currently, is a hefty price. Because, like you said, Derek Favors' value is at the 5. It's not when he plays the 4 minutes, although the Jazz defensive rating is really good when he's at the 4 still. I think it's going to be interesting. I would not be opposed to the Jazz bringing back Derek Favors because I don't think there's a ton of upgrade options. But at the same time, I do think the Jazz are doing as much due diligence as they can because $17 million, that's got to be, I mean, except for maybe a couple of the dark contracts that, you have to give up multiple first-round picks to offload. That might be the most expensive backup center in the entire league.
Yeah, I think I feel like a lot of what, outside of Tobias, what the Jazz will be looking at is getting two, $8-9 million guys and seeing if they can get some people who are willing to take a pay cut a little bit to come to a contender. And that, if they do move on from Favors, I feel like that would be what they would look for rather than a single guy. Because, like you said, single people, there's not many upgrades over Favors at the 4 position or the back at 5. So I feel like if they do get rid of, move on from Favors, it'll be for multiple solid role players.
Yeah, I think just one last thing on this. There might be a 4 that can shoot that we might not be talking about because they're not a free agent, but they're more of a trade piece. We don't know which teams are going to be looking at to just offload salary, and maybe the Jazz can be a partner for one of those teams. That may end up being the way that we find our starting 4. There's just a lot of different ways we can go. Obviously, I think Tobias is plan A going into free agency, but I think there are a lot of options, even ones that we haven't thought about just because we don't even know that their team's trying to offload them at the moment because they're waiting to see how free agency goes. So the free agency dominoes are going to come, and they're going to come hard, and it's going to be really fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are the 2 big-name free agents and the 2 that are rumored to be significantly interested in the Jazz, is how it was worded. But with the Mike Conley deal going down, and if we stand pat, we will still have a room exception of $4.8 million. So with the last couple of minutes, I think we'll just go around, and we each have picked a guy that we think would be reasonable and would fit well with the Jazz in this case if we're looking for if the team stays as it is and we just use the room exception, who we would like to have with that $4.8 million. So I think we'll start with JR, and then Kyla, and then I'll finish off.
Okay.
When we were going into the offseason, Justin Zanuck said that the Jazz were prioritizing trying to find snipers in the offseason, and the guy that I think would be a great option for the $4.8 million is one of the best three-point shooters in the league, and that is Seth Curry, who is an unrestricted free agent. For those of you who aren't huge basketball fans, I'm not talking about Steph Curry. He does have a younger brother named Seth who played for the Portland Trail Blazers last season. He was actually, I think, one of the best role players we saw in the entire Western Conference last year. He was technically listed as a shooting guard on their roster, even though he's 6'2", but he played about 20 minutes a game off the bench, averaged 8 points, and shot 45% from 3, which was the 3rd best in the NBA last season. Just to put that into perspective, that was 1.3 percentage points higher than his brother Steph, who's widely considered the best shooter of all time. So,
You're comparing apples to oranges, but yes, that is a true statement.
I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that Seth is better than his brother Steph, but just to put it into perspective, we are talking about an elite three-point shooter. Obviously, he has some struggles. He's not the best defender. He doesn't have the best size. But I think he kind of fills a role that the Jazz need now that they've traded Kyle Korver, a guy that they know can come in off the bench and be an immediate scoring threat from 3, even though they may not be the best defender. And I think Seth Curry can really do that for us. Last year, he was only making $2.7 million for the Portland Trail Blazers, and then the contract he signed before that was a 2-year, $5.9 million contract. So signing him for the mid-level exception would be more money than he's ever made in his entire career. So, I mean, I don't know if anybody will offer him more than that, but I think there's a good chance that he would accept it to be part of a contending team. There have been some rumors that both the Sixers and the Lakers and even possibly the Warriors are interested in offering Seth Curry a spot on their roster. But I think if the Jazz do offer him that full $4.8 million, and the opportunity to be on a contender where he knows he's going to have a role, I think that we would have a good shot at being able to sign him.
He's a guy that I definitely like, especially if the Jazz end up making a big move that requires them to lose Dante Exum. He's a great guy to be your first guard off the bench. But if the team does stand pat, like Caleb said, the number one priority has to be a stretch four, and I think it's got to be a stretch four that can maybe play a little bit of the five, because especially you two, we do not want Tony Bradley playing any minutes at the five next season if we can help it. So a guy that can play most of his minutes at the four, but even be our third center is Jamychal Green. He's a guy who's a solid. He basically shoots threes and he rebounds, and he also has a decent mid-range shot, but the Jazz don't shoot those that often. But he's just somebody that he did make $8 million this last season, but he got signed and a cap bump year where everyone got overpaid, and projections have him signing around $5 million. So I think he's a guy who it's been rumored that he's going to emphasize contention, and so with the Jazz he will have that opportunity to contend. He'll have that opportunity to also have a really big role. Being a sixth man is one of the biggest roles he'll ever have, so that opportunity to both contend and have a big role, I think, can be something that he finds very intriguing. He's a guy that will allow Derek Favors to play mostly the five, and he's a guy that you just imagine Donovan Mitchell being the fourth best shooter on the floor sometimes. Like almost the entire season he was our second best shooter, and so the perimeter defense was focused on him, but with Jamychal Green, that pushes Donovan all the way down to the fourth out of the five best shooters on the court. And so he's a guy that just really opens up a lot for everyone else, kind of like Jay did, but Jamychal's a little bit better of a shooter. Just doesn't offer the same ball handling and quickness and maybe perimeter defense, which is why he would be available for 4.8 probably.
Yeah, he's someone I really like as well. And kind of in the same vein of thought, the guy that I'm looking at is Reggie Bullock. He's same thing, prototypical 3-and-D guy. Just someone that kind of come in and stretch the floor. He's 6'7", but only 205 pounds, so he's like on the lighter side for sure. So probably rather than a stretch four, he wouldn't be filling in any center minutes for sure. He'd be playing like a wing, kind of like a Joe Ingles role, kind of similar size. But he's a good defender. He's shot almost 40% from three for his career. Good handles. And although he's coming from the Lakers, and it sounds like they're wanting to keep him because they're going to be in desperate need of everything besides Anthony Davis and LeBron.
And Kuzma.
Oh, Kuzma.
They've got
three people on the roster. I still think right now he's on a 2-year, $5 million deal. That's what he just came off of. So I think our room exception would be potentially more than LA would be willing to offer, but also worst comes to worst and we offer him the 4.7, 4.8, and the Lakers want to outdo us, at least they had to pay 4.8 instead of 2.5. So
making the Lakers sign another star would make me so happy.
Yeah. But I think that's all for us today, guys. We're excited for free agency. One of the best Jazz teams we've seen in a long time, and sounds like it's going to be one of the better off seasons we've had in a long time. Just more exciting free agency than we're probably used to, especially after last year. But thanks for joining us today. Share with your friends, family, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.